Good day, everyone. Welcome to a new session here on the Shift Network Sound Healing Summit. We always appreciate having you with us. And our special guest coming up this time around is Krista Holland. Krista Holland is a multifaceted teacher, frame drummer, and founder of the Sacred Drumming Academy, where she shares her in-depth training and studies of the frame drum, as well as the ancient mythology, lore, and history connected to the worldwide cross-cultural art form of sacred drumming. Krista, welcome.
Hi, Alec. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to this. It's a big, fascinating topic, the power of drum and rhythm and how it, in the ancient world, and how it affects us still today. So before we get into that, and I see you have a lot of beautiful drums surrounding you there, so hopefully we will have the chance to hear their voices speak as we proceed. But to get us warmed up, I was hoping maybe to share just a little bit about your story and any particular influences or inspirations that guided you onto this path of working with the drums.
Well, yes, there's been some really powerful influences and mentors. The one that comes to mind first and foremost is my main mentor, the late Lane Redmond. She wrote a book called When the Drummers Were Women, and I was already a drummer when I found her work and research. And when I learned about the polycultural history and the deep feminine history of drumming, it really spoke to me and changed my life, changed my perspective. And also, as a child, I grew up around a lot of music. And as I became a young adult, I started using music, what I now would recognize as medicinally, and really as a form of healing and recalibration. And so those threads have stayed with me all these years, and the drum now is one of my main forms of meditation and of prayer and ritual and ceremony.
Thank you. And the frame drum, had you played other drums before you encountered Lane Redmond's work? Or?
Yes, actually, I started out as a drum set player, sort of circuitously or serendipitously. I just found an attraction to drumming, and I ended up having someone gift me a drum set. And that actually randomly happened twice in my life. I thought I had given up the drum set, and again, somebody actually came to my house and said, I bought you this drum set at a garage sale, so looks like you're drumming again. I also studied with a Nigerian drummer, Babatunde Olatunji, and he originally taught me rather African drumming. And I started pursuing a lot of different forms of world drumming before I ended up on the frame drum. Once I learned about the frame drum, I felt that that might speak to why I had always really felt a deep call to drumming. And so I ended up just really specializing in frame drumming and following this path of not only the techniques of the drum and the rhythms, but also this deep, ancient, mythic history of drumming.
Interesting. The full drum kit. So I remember seeing a Lane Redmond video. She was talking about her early inspiration of Karen Carpenter on the kit. And I imagine that day's female kit drummers was like from another planet. Yeah. Now there are lots of great, full-on female full kit drummers. Interesting how things evolve. But we'll set up the full kit for that for the next video. But our star of the show today here is the frame drum, which certainly is easier to tote around than a full kit. So tell us a little more about this instrument. You refer to it as a mythic instrument. Tell us a little more about the history and culturally and mythologically about all the many elements involved with the frame drum.
It does have a lot of elements connected to it. And actually, that word element is how we learn the drum, is through the elements, which I'll speak to a little bit more in a minute. But the drum itself, the frame drum, is one of the oldest drums on the planet. And many people might be familiar with the shamanic style of frame drumming, where there is a beater and that style. In this style that I'm playing, it's a handheld instrument and there's no crossbar on the back, so we play it either on the lap or in the upright position. And the history of the frame drum goes back millennia. And again, it's a cross-cultural, polycultural, really a multicultural instrument historically. No one really knows which came first, whether it be the shamanic style drumming with the beater or the handheld where we're simply using our hands to play the drum. But the images go back at least 8,000 years and even more, most likely. So we first see images in modern day Turkey, which was Anatolia. We see the drum show up in these different votives, usually of women holding the drum from all over the Middle East. And the drum migrates really all over the world. And as it migrates, there are different stories that come out about the drum and different myths that have the drum really as a prominent feature in these mythological stories. So the drum really, the frame drum is a drum where the head of the drum, the skin is wider and deeper than the depth of the shell. And again, like you said, it's very portable. So the drum easily migrated and was brought all across the world, most likely on the Silk Route, on the trade routes. It traveled through maritime travel and it traveled with nomadic peoples. And then it ended up really planting itself like a seed in different cultures. And that's one of the things that's really interesting about the frame drum is that once it sets seeds, it really takes on different cultural expressions. And so there are many, many stories and many, many myths that go along with this instrument. It is also a spiritual tool and a contemplative tool. It's a meditative tool. Of course, it's a shamanic tool. It's really considered an instrument for transforming consciousness or celebration. It's used in rites of passage. So it really just has this very, very rich historical, cross-cultural context.
And as you noted, and as you spent a lot of time researching, and Lane Redmond did as well, the wealth of imagery of female drummers associating this drum with various goddesses, like all around the Mediterranean, Near East, and beyond. So it was clearly rooted, the female drumming tradition. But so, what do you think happened along the way? How did that get lost?
Got lost in the midst of time or in the sands of time. And actually, in certain cultures, drumming, it goes through these peaks and valleys. It expresses itself and then it dies back down. And there's different reasons why the drum rises up and then, in a sense, disappears. One thing about the drum, of course, why it disappears from archaeological records itself is that it's made of skin and wood. We also now have synthetic heads for the drum, and there's a reason why we sometimes use the synthetic head, which is a different subject. But as far as why it disappears, again, there's many different reasons for that, just as ancient cultures rise and disappear. And what is interesting also about that is that in the archaeological records that we do have, we have, as you mentioned, thousands and thousands of images, primarily of women with the drum from the ancient days. And these artistic images show up in all different mediums of art and all over the world. So again, a small statuary of a woman with a drum, paintings of women with drums, relief on the walls, frescoes, different amulets that people would wear in the temples of Dendra in Egypt. They're carved on the wall and also into hieroglyph. And so the imagery is really, really pervasive. And actually, if you follow a timeline, you can almost always find an image of what we would say is woman with frame drum as an archetype or a symbol. You can find her hiding in plain sight in art that actually is on a continuum. There might be certain periods where artists aren't making that image, but for some reason, and maybe many reasons, that archetype of woman with frame drum or that symbol really never dies down. I mean, it just continues to pop up in many areas throughout history.
Very good. Just an ongoing cyclical rising and falling, and exciting times now. Recent, years, decade or two, where it seemed to be an exciting time of resurgence of awareness and evolution, more popular spread of the practice of the drums. So that's what's most vital for us now. But another interesting thing I noticed when I was researching over the weekend, and even biblical references to female drummers. There's several, including Miriam, who I believe was the older sister of Moses, but references to her playing the tambourine in various celebrations. They said tambourine. I bet that was not quite the correct translation. I bet they meant frame drum, but it's very interesting that's even in the biblical records, because there's several specifically female drummers, at various celebrations and rites. So it slipped through in the Bible too. But anyway, so we have the drum here now to work with and enjoy and continue to learn from. And thank you for being an avatar of continuing this tradition and developing it and bringing it forward. So maybe open question. Would you like to let the drums speak? Anything you'd like to demonstrate of how we can relate to and use the drums as an ongoing practice now?
Sure. The drum, again, and is an amazing instrument for meditation, for contemplation, for prayer. The way that we learn the drum is through the elements. And this simple instrument, we can make many different sounds in an open soundscape.
Beautiful, thank you. It's good to let the drum speak for itself for a few moments, as now as we get back into the mental box a little bit, and chime in at any point. 'Cause there's several different categories that one could think about the drum therapeutically. I suppose one would be, as you alluded to, the primal alchemical psychology of the five classic elements. And when you're doing a session or performing, do you ever consciously think it's like, I want to put more fire energy here or more of a watery flow here, depending on the needs of the group or individual, or just intuit, just feel it out, or both?
Yes, both. But your point about, in a sense, creating a remedy in the elemental energies is definitely something that we can bring in to the drumming practice, whether for ourselves or with others. And we can liken it to the chakra system from the yogic traditions of India, which they have such a brilliant way of understanding energy and understanding elemental energy. And it's something that I think most people can relate to right away. For instance, the earth stroke, something very stable and grounding, very solid and earthy. In a sense, we could create a rhythm or a composition based around that earthy, stable energy. And we can use that when perhaps we're feeling a little spaced out or ungrounded, and that can help root us down. And we can also bring in the mythic imagination while we're working with the elements, and also as a way to honor the elements. So we're honoring the earth, we're honoring the water element, and yes, sometimes adding in more fire when we want to pick up the pace of a rhythm or kind of add that spark and add that dynamic action. So we do work, in a sense, alchemically with these elements that are the strokes of the drum. And a lovely thing about it as well is that I find it helps people of all different ages find a way into learning the drum that is really embodied and organic and somatic, and something that's relatable, because of course we all are made up of the elements, and the elements are such a great part of our life when we're by a river and we're attuning to that energy of the flow of the water. And then we are bringing that also onto the drum. It's also a really, in a way, simple way for people to actually remember the different strokes. And so, yes, we can definitely work with the elements as remedies, so to speak.
Thank you. That is just the tip of the iceberg of a big topic, because I'm always very interested in the elements. Just, it's the one of the original systems of psychology, one of the oldest systems of energetic classification, and so thank you for that. Rhythm could be worked with it very powerfully. But so we've got that, some of the ancient philosophies about alchemical elemental rhythms. But getting to the modern world, we talk more in the terms of like entrainment of heart rate and respiration, and ultimately, and also brain waves. The two interact synergistically. Would you like to say a little bit about using sound in those capacities, or using the drums in those capacities?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. It is interesting that the drum is believed and is, I think, pretty solid research on how the drum affects the brain waves. And that right there is a really powerful way that the drum can shift our consciousness. And as the modality of drumming, if we're holding a steady rhythm and a certain frequency, a certain time, how quickly or how slowly we're creating a rhythm, that can have a pretty pronounced effect on the brain waves. So for those that are familiar, we go from the beta wave, which is more that quick kind of engaged, where we might be thinking a lot and conversing and things like that, then we might move down into an alpha wave or a theta wave, and even down into delta or up into gamma wave. These different rhythms, rhythmic signatures can affect the brain waves and also create a resonance and a resonant field, which is a little bit of another aspect of that. But when we shift brain waves, especially if we can get down into that theta wave, that is really likened to a meditative state. And one of the things that I've heard about drumming in the research is that when we hold a steady rhythm, whether we're making that rhythm ourselves or someone else is holding that rhythm, that it can readily often move somebody into the theta wave. And theta wave is almost what's called hypnagogic between sleeping and waking. Like when you're waking up and you're still kind of having a dream, or you're not quite awake, or you're just falling asleep. It's a very powerful time in our consciousness. And practitioners of meditation, really well practiced, 20 years on the meditation cushion, they move their brain waves into theta. One of the things about theta wave, unless you are a very experienced meditative practitioner, often you would fall asleep. And so it has been said that with drumming, it's a way to actually move into theta wave while still awake, and that it can have a powerful potential for somebody that might not have that depth of meditation practice where somebody's really put the time in. And so drumming is a key that can open up this doorway to different states of consciousness. And it's still being researched now in modern research, with people doing different kinds of studies to see what actually happens. And then that branches out into different types of therapies, and the way that people are starting to look at music as sound healing and as a modality for healing. And the drum also shows up in different demographics where it can be really helpful. So there is a lot to say about that as well, of brain waves and the potential there. And I think it's something that we can leave as an open-ended inquiry, with indigenous wisdom that's carried through, and then meeting that also with modern research and seeing where these two confer and what the potentials might be.
I think yes, and I think that's a great insight that you just shared a minute or two ago. That one of the one of the values of the drum as an ally is that, as you noted, when you go into that theta state, usually the body interprets that as falling asleep. But the drum is also adding energy into the system. So there's that interesting dichotomy of slower, relaxed states, but the energizing as well that keeps you consciousness rolling forward.
I love that you bring up those two almost seemingly contrasting experiences. And that is how I experience drumming, is it can energize you and relax you simultaneously. And also when we're moving into theta wave or even alpha brain waves, we can also liken that to the trance state, or to the flow state, or to the zone, where we think about elite athletes or people that do fasting or different kinds of austerities or run for many miles and things like that, how that can really shift them into the flow state. And drumming is another modality that can have the potential to transport us into the flow or the zone or trance. And of course, trance is a very deeply connected part of the history of drumming, is the trance cultures. And trance, of course, is in the majority of indigenous cultures. There's some type of trance practice, and drumming being one of the most prominent.
Yes, that is a major association with drum, and seeming dichotomy of relaxing but energizing this thing about the work of Michael Harner, who, for anyone not familiar with him, he wrote a book called The Way of the Shaman, a classic book that introduced a lot of the shamanic cultural insights to the West years ago in the 60s, I think. But it doesn't matter. But nonetheless, I seem to recall some recordings that he put out of his shamanic trance drumming, and recall it was a pretty speedy tempo. It was like boom, 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 boom. Not something you would think is relaxing, but the repetitive entrainment of that was what drove the consciousness. Maybe it overdrives certain circuits of the brain, and which allows those deeper ones to come to the surface. I'm just free associating here. Any thoughts about that theory? Or
Yes, it's really interesting actually. In shamanic drumming, it does tend to be a very quick tempo. And that quick repetition is a driving mechanism, and it can drive the brain waves. And we also think about rhythm as an organizing principle. So yeah, playing with the tempo. And I think it is a little bit surprising that oftentimes that tempo for the shamanic induction actually is really quickly paced.
would you like to just play a little bit and sound a little bit of an example of this type? I know there's probably many different types of trance induction drumming. So yeah, whatever you think are effective rhythmic approaches for tweaking, altering our consciousness in those ways.
Well, again, in the shamanic style of drumming, you would often see the drum being played with the beater. And in the handheld style, the thumb, in a sense, becomes that beater. We typically wouldn't necessarily, with the frame drum, just hold that steady rhythm for the duration, because there's so many different techniques that we're using, and there is an intersection between shamanic drumming and sacred drumming or mythic drumming, but there's also some distinctions. With the shamanic drumming, that's a whole classification in itself, and we can really look to indigenous cultures to receive that wisdom, and people that have come through these unbroken traditions. And I, in a sense, leave that particular subject and practice to people that really have those deep roots in shamanic tradition. And then the other aspect, which is more of what I'm sharing, is sacred drumming, frame drumming, mythic drumming. It is something that is used in celebration, in ritual, in rites of passage. So that's where there is some intersection, but there's also a distinction that when we're drumming for celebration, it's very musical, and we're really kind of playing for that musicality and the diversity of expressions, these different sounds and the elements that I was describing and just gave a little taste of earlier. And then in ritual, there might be a particular type of rhythm that also is used culturally, historically, in different areas of the world. In the Mediterranean, they have rhythms that have roots that go back thousands and thousands of years. We wouldn't even know how far back, because we're speaking about an oral tradition or a mouth to ear or hand to drum, if you will. And so there are different ways to explore whether you're going to be working with the drum shamanically or you're going to be working with the drum ceremonially, ritually. And there would be different types of rhythms for each of those distinctions or practices or rituals, we could say. So again, Yeah, quick driving rhythm for shamanic practice, maybe something more languid, spacious for meditation or for sound healing, where we're not necessarily trying to create induction so much as open up a sonic field or a sonic container for the person to have their own experience, and how, it kind of brings to mind as well how different types of music affect us and can bring about different states of not only the physiology, but also how we might feel and how they might connect us and tap into the heart center, or the way that music might really inspire us to dance or to move into um, different kinds of ways of working with the drum and music in general. That again, it's a little bit, I think of it as a remedy, and I use that word lightly, and it's a big subject. So a little bit of that.
Yes, they all are. All we can do is hopefully just introduce a few little snippets of thoughts that'll inspire people to continue to take these sound and rhythm journeys of their own. But you did touch on a really big topic that's become much more popular recently, using the vocabulary of the biofield and the energy field. And I've always thought of various rhythms in terms of, certain rhythms that will like break up energy patterns, and then certain other rhythms that will help reestablish and harmonize energy patterns. Would you like to speak on that theme for a few moments, and or samples of rhythms you might apply for those reasons?
Yeah, I think that again, it's modulating the tempo, it's the intention of the practitioner or the drummer when it's playing the music, and how that might influence. There is a little bit of a gray area as far as how much we know about how music affects us. I mean, we're learning more all the time, and how to set up these different kinds of environments, not only our physical environment, but as we're talking about a sonic environment, and how we can go back to this theory of the elements. And so it's like it's earthy, it's creating more flow, it's fiery and energizing and stimulating. There is some more interesting textural stuff that has an effect on us. And then the element of space, which people don't always put in space in the elements, but for me, it's a really big part of the element, is the element of space. And that might be how much space there is in a musical composition or in a drumming session, where that space has its own effect on us. It's like the pause in a conversation. And as I like to also think about, is the space between the thoughts. It's that gap, or if we see a painting, the negative space, and the space in a room where we don't have furniture, things like that. And I think that that's a really important aspect into what you're talking about, the structures or how we're setting up the biofield and things like that. These are different things that we can take into consideration in how we're working with drumming as a modality for sound healing. And there's a lot to say.
It is. It does get into the realm of sort of artistic interpretation as well. As you noted, our old friends, the elements, which is, an ancient science of energetic and psychological classification. But rhythms, one could, and you probably do get into these sorts of things in your courses, which we'll talk about in a moment. But rhythms, sharp like rattles, breaking up energy fields, and then maybe a more earthy heart rhythm that really fortifies someone's field. I would think that would be one possible protocol. But art and science and creativity and individual expression that I imagine you would flow with in respectful relationship with the person or group you're working with, not just a prefabricated approach. So, is that a fair statement?
I think it is, yes. I think what it brings to mind for me is the intuitive playing. And in the Sacred Drumming Academy and in different courses through the Shift Network, we are both learning very structural, traditional rhythms. We're learning a lot of technique. We are learning notations, compositions. It's a real bona fide musical study. It's quite amazing, actually, for such a simple instrument. We can play it in a very simple way. You mentioned the heartbeat. I think about this sort of double beat, heartbeat feel. And that's so accessible right away as we're learning to play the drum. And that actually can have a very powerful effect on people, just that. But then we also go into these different techniques of snapping, and it's this cross-cultural ornamentations that actually come from many different cultures that have all been fused in this modern era onto the frame drum. And so the intuitive is another aspect that can be really, really healing, I find, for people that are drummers and perhaps people that are also listening. There's something that's very in the moment, and there's an immediacy, and there is almost a primal, organic quality that comes through. And it's interesting, makes me think a little bit about the brain waves that we were talking about a little bit ago. And there's some research to indicate that when a drumming rhythm actually doesn't follow a repetition that is easily recognizable, so it might like shift into different kinds of rhythms, there's some evidence that that actually can move people up into a gamma brainwave, which has its own unique characteristics rather, into the gamma wave. So the intuitive drumming, and that might be where we are shifting in and out of different kinds of rhythms. And then of course, using notations and following a composition and the repetition of one rhythm over and over again. Those are two different ways of approaching. So those also have different effects on the drummer or the person that's listening, whether we're in a structure of repetition or in a free flow, intuitive drumming style.
Yeah, I think I get it. And the multitudinous, multidimensional effects and benefits of rhythm, I think, is where you're going with that, from the repetitive for entrainment to those more complex ones, is found in some of these world traditions of percussion and music that are the complex polyrhythms at play is sometimes beyond me. I'm a big dummy. Like, I understand like Charlie Watts and like James Brown drummers, but when you have these musics that you have a count of 7 and a count of 3 and against 4, is like, but it has a very powerful structuring effect on the consciousness and a somatic effect too, because you sort of feel it. People aren't there measuring it with an abacus, but
I love
ultimately.
it. I love what you're saying. It's reminding me of jazz. And I read somewhere recently this whole thing about AI and whether we'll need drummers and writers anymore. AI will just do it all for us. And the writer was saying, well, in the future, very near future, it'll be really about this jazz, this improv, and that is something that is innately human in a sense, is this ability to just be in the moment and see what arises from our own depths, our spiritual expression, our energetic expression, and things like that. So here's the jazz on the drum.
Yeah, we hold that affirmation that the human element and human touch and artistry will never be AI'd out of existence. Like, Let's hear an AI Art Blakey or Tony Williams. Yeah, they can do a EDM beat, but there's so much to the rhythm world. But we'll let that go. We could do that all rant all afternoon. But as far as if people wanted to like get their hands on a drum and begin to play and experience this for themselves, do you have any suggestions on how people might shop for and select a drum? What to look for?
I do actually have a video on my YouTube that has some different examples of drums. This drum I have here is from a company called Cooperman Frame Drums. They're an American company. And this is one of my own signature drums that I designed with Cooperman. So you can look for the Krista Holland Cooperman drum, and an easy price point to get started are Remo drums. Those are great drums to get started on. And there are some really amazing artisan craftsman drummers around the world, depending on which area you're in. And in the video on YouTube, I talk about, if you're on Australia, check out Steam and Lumber. If you're around Greece, in Poland, in Europe, there's a lot of different amazing craftsmen, drummers, drum makers.
All right, thank you for that. Because I'm just curious, 'cause I saw some of those Remo drums as well, and similar manufacturers that were like that $40-50 price point. Just curious if those were good quality enough to have a satisfying start. Yes.
They're great to start. Yeah, the Remos are great.
Okay, cool. Just want to double check. Sometimes the cheapest thing is like not the best value. You know what I mean? But
They were actually amazingly great to start on, and I love the price point for people because then you can see if it feels like something that you want to pursue, then eventually you're going to want probably to have an instrument that is more resonant and actually will really help your drumming. But yeah, if you're just getting started, if you already know you're loving drumming and you don't even, you're like, I'm in, then check out Cooperman or some of the other artisan drum makers.
okay, good tips just to get hands on and begin to get into the groove of the experiences. That's always the real deal. Taking that journey on your own. So you mentioned your YouTube channel. If someone would like to find out more about your work, where's the best place to go? Best website?
Sacreddrumming.com. It's where it can lead you to the Sacred Drumming Academy. There's also KristaHolland.com. I think it's under construction right now.
Oh, and you mentioned it earlier, the Sacred Drumming Academy. I did notice that there. Tell us a little bit more about that program. Is that ongoing?
The Sacred Drumming Academy is a program where you can learn to play the frame drum from the very beginning. And we also learn about the ancient history and really the mythic history of the drum. So for those that are interested in that, you'll learn about these different cultural references from around the world, and also about these priestesshoods and the different goddesses that played the drum. But it's for people of all walks of life and all ages and all demographics. It's a program that has 100 or so videos that take you through learning to play the drum, and then we have some live classes, and it also leads to a practitioner facilitators course where you can learn about how to bring the drum into communities and also into different demographics, and how the drum can really be utilized as a tool for meditation, for personal practice, also for ceremony and celebrations and things like that, rites of passage for different types of people. And so it's a combination of the technique, the history, the mythology, and then also some modern research. So you have a really broad understanding of the drum as a tool for connection and transformation.
There we go. Connection, transformation, expression, and community. I guess all of those things could come into play in a beautiful weave. And these community gatherings are coming back to life. You used to call them drum circles, but you've been involved in that sort of work recently, bringing people together to drum together and form that group field of rhythm.
Yeah, we do. I have classes and groups and circles locally where we learn different rhythms and we practice in circle. It's a little bit different than maybe a drum circle, the traditional way we kind of think about that, or the classic way. We are learning really in a structured way, but also in a ceremonial, ritual way. But we are also learning different rhythms and different compositions. So there is a little bit of rigor for those that progress on to really learn the frame drum as a musical instrument that has a lot of different dynamics and depths and all the different sounds that you can bring out of it. So we get into playing off of each other, and there's times when we would play for people in different kinds of rites and passage and things like that. So those circles that we are um, working in together and that I'm facilitating, there's some different ways that we approach that for the connection, the community connection, for celebration, and then also that learning environment for brain optimization, and then taking those circles and facilitating rites of passage for other people and community members, and also sound healing.
Yeah. Because that's my understanding. A lot of some of the indigenous communities, the healing was really a group communal effort, a big blessing away or a sing. It's to bring the whole community together. It may have been led by a certain medicine person as a focal point, but it's really took a village to help achieve these good effects.
It's a wonderful way to connect. Actually, one of the things I love about being in a sacred drumming circle, we create what's called wordless coherence, and it's a way for us to bond and connect, but we don't necessarily we're not always talking. I mean, sometimes we're talking and that's part of it, but the connection is amazing what can happen just through the music and the rhythm. There's something that happens where you often feel a sense of bonding without maybe even necessarily knowing someone's life history or having a time when you're as intimate with them as you are simply holding down rhythms together. It's a very powerful effect. And another aspect of it is that coherence that we create.
Yeah, coherence, rhythmic rapport on one-on-one level and community level. So that's just very powerful and very beneficial medicine for our planet in these times that we are doing our best to flow through. So on that note, our last minutes are ticking away here. The ticking of the hour. The ticking of the hourglass doesn't make sense. The ticking, you get the point. The ticking of the hourglass. So on that note, I just have to thank you for being here today, Krista. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Alec. It's been lovely to talk with you. I love your questions and your own depth of wisdom and knowledge that you're bringing. So thank you.
Thank you. A pleasure. And to find out more about Krista's work, I imagine her sites are linked below. So find your way there and go to YouTube and listen to some of the drumming videos and the recordings that she has offered. Because being in the music, let the music do the talking. I'm always a fan of that. So. But on that note, we'll say farewell to you all. We'll say thank you to the Shift Network for providing this platform for these journeys on the sound current. And most importantly, thank you all for joining us. Your energy and attention is what makes this all come to life, and you are appreciated. We invite you to come on back, because there's more to come here on the Shift Network Sound Healing Summit, and we'll see you next time.